Hello, friends. I hope you're out wandering through nature, exploring the natural world around you. Do you enjoy writing about your wanderings? Nature journaling is an awesome, fun way to remember all the adventures you have taken and how you felt during those journeys. If you're looking for some beautiful journals to keep track of all your wanderings, I have several available on Amazon, including some guided journals for children. Start your journey in journaling by clicking on the link in the show notes. Keep exploring the nature around you and keep journaling all your wanderings. Hey friends, it's Paul, and I'd like to welcome you to the podcast today. I'm in the studio, and the weather is not the greatest outside, so I want to get some good recording. So I am in the studio, and I want to tell you a little bit about a really interesting sighting I had in my backyard the other day. I had 4 deer walking across my yard. They were just moseying along, looking for some food, digging through the snow. And I kept trying to figure out which deer they were. Was it Prancer or was it Vixen or Donner or Cupid or... Well, I couldn't figure it out, but I kept watching because I knew eventually they were going to take off and fly through the sky back to the North Pole. I figured they were just hanging around here getting some food and they were going to head back because they have busy night coming up pretty soon. And Santa's probably missing them. But then I realized that they weren't going to fly because if you remember in the newer version of Miracle on 34th Street, when Santa was in the court and they were trying to get him to make the reindeer fly, he went up to the reindeer and he starts laughing and says, well, everyone knows they only fly on Christmas Eve. So I knew I was waiting for something that wasn't going to happen yet. So anyhow, the deer wandered through my yard, and that's also when I realized, well, these aren't reindeer. Yeah, there is a difference. So you may be wondering, what's the difference between deer and reindeer? Well, there is a big difference, actually. There's 43 different species of deer in the world, which are part of the Cervidae family. These species are divided into 2 subfamilies. Now there's the Old World deer, which are Cervinae, the Latin, and the New World deer, which are Capreolinae. Now reindeer, which are also known as caribou, which I'll get to that in a second, are Old World deer because they originally came from places like Europe, Africa, and Asia. They were originally not found in North America, but now they are. Okay, so you can find them in North America as well. But because they originally came from the Old World, they're known as the Old World deer. Now, in Europe and Asia, they're actually called reindeer, whether they're in the wild or they're domesticated. Yes, people do raise reindeer. So in Europe and Asia, reindeer. In North America, they're referred to as caribou. So that's where the name caribou comes from. So that's why I said you can call them caribou as well. When they're in the wild, they're known as caribou. But when they're domesticated in North America, they're known as reindeer. So it gets a little more confusing in North America. Now, there was a scientific study that was done fairly recently, and it started indicating that through migration mapping, you're probably wondering, what on earth is that? Well, actually, they do studies of where the animals are migrating. And it's not just watching them. It's not just through satellite imagery. They're also looking at fossils. They're looking at different indicators of where these animals existed over time. Matter of fact, they studied the past 21,000 years. So over the past 21,000 years, they took all this information and they did what they call migration mapping. Where have these animals been? Where have they headed? Where are they going? Where have they migrated to? And all that data that they took and they combined together, they found that the two species have always been in their own regions. So they're kind of thinking that maybe caribou and reindeer are not the same beasts. Yeah, so they actually say that they are close cousins, but reindeer and caribou might not be as closely related as we thought. So they're not the same animals. In other words, the European and Asian reindeer have always been in Europe and Asia, and the North American ones always in North America. Now, maybe further back than 21,000 years, they were together and they separate. We don't know. So there are some theories out there about whether or not we should be calling caribou reindeer. Maybe we should be calling them caribou and reindeer as two separate species. But anyhow, right now, most people believe reindeer, caribou, the same animal. So it doesn't matter what you call it. Unless you're in Europe, don't call them caribou. Call them reindeer, or they won't know what you're talking about. Now, there are 9 species, or I should say subspecies, of reindeer in the world. There's the barren ground caribou, the woodland caribou, the prairie caribou, porcupine caribou, mountain reindeer, forest reindeer, Svalbard reindeer, wild Siberian tundra reindeer, and finally, the domestic reindeer. So if you notice, there are some called caribou, some called reindeer. So North America, caribou, Asia and Europe, reindeer. Now the Latin name for reindeer is Rangifer tarandus. So where are reindeer or caribou found? Well, they're found in Arctic, subarctic, tundra, boreal, and mountainous regions. In Northern Europe, Siberia, and of course, like I said, North America. So you won't find them here in the U.S. You'll find them up north in Canada, that part of North America. So the Arctic, subarctic regions, the tundras, boreal, mountainous regions. That's where you're going to find reindeer. Now, because they live in these really cold regions, they have to be adapted to the cold. And trust me, they are. They actually have a double layer of fur to keep them warm. They have a dense undercoat and a longer outer coat consisting of hollow hair, which traps air for insulation and buoyancy. I always like to give the example about polar bears. Polar bears, their fur is actually clear. It's hollow. When they're up in the Arctic, that hollow fur acts as insulation because, well, basically air is an insulator. So that hollow fur helps keep them warm. But when you see them in the summertime in the zoo and they're swimming around in their pool that they have, and then they lay in the sun, that hollow hair traps not just air, but water. And that's why when you see these polar bears in the summer in the zoo, they look kind of green and moldy. That's why. So same thing happens with reindeer. Their fur is actually hollow. It helps to insulate them, helps to keep them warm. Now that hollow hair also helps with buoyancy. And what do I mean by that? Well, they are good swimmers. These animals, they go on great migrations, which I'll talk about in a little while, but they need to go across rivers And when they're swimming across those rivers, they need to stay buoyant. Otherwise, it's going to be harder for such a large, heavy animal to make it across. So the hollow hair actually gives them that buoyancy, helps them to float better. Now, the hollow hair of the outer coat also gives them their whitish color. So that's what makes them look more white in their color than most other deer. Most deer you'll see, they look more brown. Now, even the nose is specially adapted for living in the cold temperatures. There's a lot of blood vessels lining the inner nasal cavity, which helps to warm the air before it reaches the lungs. So it's almost like a preheating of the air as it enters. All those blood vessels inside the nasal cavity help to do that. Otherwise, it's breathing in cold air and it could freeze the lungs. So it goes through a pre-warming through the nose. So all of this is adapting this animal to survive in cold weather. They also have specially adapted hooves. So the bottom of the feet, the hooves on reindeer actually change with the seasons. It's really weird how this happens, but it helps them adapt to the cold climate they live in. So during the summer, when a lot of the snow melts, I mean, you're not talking balmy weather, but you are talking warm enough for the snow to melt and all. The pads on the bottom of the hooves are very spongy. Yeah, they actually grow the spongy material on the bottom, and that gives them better traction on the wet ground. Yet in the winter, the pads on the bottom of the hooves actually shrink and they harden. So they're not spongy and soft. They get very hard. That allows the hoof to expose the very sharp edges. That way they can dig in the snow for food, and it also gives them better traction on the slippery surfaces of the ice and snow that they're walking on. So the hooves, specially designed for where they live. Now, reindeer are very social animals. I mean, they have to. They have all those elves hanging around the workshop. No, I'm just kidding. They are very social animals. It's very rare to find reindeer or caribou all alone. Yeah, they're very social. They hang out in large herds. Sometimes in the thousands, you'll find these herds. So the herds are very large. During migration, the herds will actually gather together. So you'll have one herd over here, another herd over there, and they get together for migration, mostly for protection. When you're migrating long distances, and yes, they can migrate long distance. They're one of the longest terrestrial migrators, up to 3,000 miles of migration each year. Now, because of that, they want to be in large numbers so that they can protect themselves from predators like wolves. Now, when they're migrating, usually they're going at speeds of around 20 miles an hour, so they're not constantly running. I've seen videos of these large reindeer herds running away from danger, maybe a pack of wolves. Well, they can run fast, but most of the time, the average speed for migration is about 20 miles an hour. You're going 3,000 miles in a year, you want to conserve your energy and not go too quick. And of course, I did mention earlier, during the migrations, they do come across some large rivers that they may have to cross. Well, it's not a problem for the reindeer. After all, they are excellent swimmers. I already talked about the hollow hair, which makes them more buoyant, but they also have very wide hooves. That allows them to use those wide hooves to basically paddle through the water, and it helps with the buoyancy as well. Now, reindeer are unique among deer species, because both the males and the females grow antlers. Most deer species, just the males, the bucks, are the ones who grow the antlers. It's a territorial thing. They're fighting for the females, fighting for a mate. So they need those antlers to protect themselves from other males, but they also need those antlers to fight other males to get the best females. Now with reindeer, it's the same thing. The males have the antlers to fight for the females, defend territories. Females are using their antlers to defend their territory for food. Now, once again, I said they're social animals, so you will find large herds. But during mating season, then they go off on their own a little bit. That way they can get the best mates and they can raise their family, and then they join the herd again. So they need to provide food for their family. The females are defending their food. That's why they need antlers. Males grow rather large antlers, about 50 inches in length, whereas females, theirs are shorter, probably a little less than half, about 20 inches in length. Now, males typically shed their antlers after the mating season, which is late autumn. Females, they keep theirs through the winter, helping them compete for food in snowy conditions. It allows them to dig through the snow so that they can feed their family as well as themselves. So that's why the females keep their antlers throughout the winter, and they will shed them in the spring. Now, wait a minute here. The reindeer that Santa uses, Dasher, Dancer, Donner Vixen, Comet Cupid, I forgot them all. But anyhow, the Santa's reindeer, don't they have antlers in all the pictures you see? Females? Must be. Yeah, I actually saw a Christmas movie this time of year. My wife and I love watching all the holiday movies, usually the sappy Hallmark ones, but we've seen some other ones. I just saw a new movie that was put on Amazon, Red One, and I love the part when Santa's talking to the girls. Yeah, he kept calling the reindeer the girls. And it's like, yes, someone finally got it right. Yeah, Santa's reindeer are female. They have to be. Of course, someone might argue with me, hey, they're magical, so they could be males and just grow their antlers because they're magical. But no, really, the females keep their antlers all winter long. The males shed them before winter comes, usually in late autumn. So if they have them on during December, they're females. So, sorry guys. Santa's reindeer are all females. Now, the diet of reindeer. Herbivores. Now, if you're not familiar with that term, an herbivore is an animal that eats only plants. So during the summer, they're eating things like grasses, sedges, leaves, herbs, flowering plants, mosses, ferns, and even mushrooms. But in the wintertime, all those things are buried under the snow. Yeah, they do have the antlers, the females do anyhow, to help them dig through the snow to get to some of these good plants, but a lot of them have already died off or they are dormant for the winter. They have the hooves to dig through the snow as well. So in the wintertime, they're primarily feeding on mosses under the snow. They actually call it reindeer moss. The reindeer moss is actually very high in carbs, vitamins, and proteins. So it's a great source of food for the reindeer in the wintertime when they need that extra food, especially high protein food with a lot of high carbs. So they're eating mostly the reindeer moss. They might find some other foods, might chew on some branches of trees and all, but remember, they're up in the Arctic tundra. You don't find a lot of plants up there. So they're digging through the snow and getting to this reindeer moss in the wintertime. Now, reindeer are pretty cool in that they can see in ultraviolet light. Now, if you're not familiar with what I mean by the ultraviolet, there's wavelengths of light. Ultraviolet is a wavelength of light that humans cannot see. Birds can. I've actually seen how birds can see the ultraviolet under a black light, special black lights. The ultraviolet wavelength allows birds to spot good mates. Yeah, the different birds, I mean, the better mates, supposedly, the healthier ones, they glow in a better ultraviolet, more ultraviolet colors. You also see insects seeing ultraviolet. Insects are looking for the ultraviolet on flowers. It's almost like a target for the nectar. But reindeer also see in the ultraviolet. They're mostly using this during the winter time. It allows them to survive in this cold Arctic climate. Seeing the ultraviolet allows them to detect food like lichens, which glows in the ultraviolet. It contrasts against the snow, and it makes it so much easier for them to see it. It also allows them to spot predators better, which might otherwise blend into the snowy landscape. Because even predators like Arctic fox, they're white in color. They're trying to be camouflaged, trying to hide from their prey so that they can catch it easier. But any ultraviolet glow to these animals, the reindeer spot, and it allows them to avoid these predators, hopefully. Now, reindeer do produce milk. It's actually very nutrient-rich milk. It is said to be one of the richest and nutritious milks of any terrestrial animal. The Nordic people actually will raise reindeer. They are domestic reindeer, obviously, and they will milk these domestic reindeer. Now, the Nordic people will actually raise reindeer, domestic reindeer, and they milk them. They use the milk not just for drinking, but they also make cheeses out of it. So it helps them survive. The Nordic people helps them survive these cold climates as well, because they're getting this very nutritious milk from the reindeer. Okay, now I did mention about Santa's reindeer, and they only fly on Christmas Eve. Well, actually, reindeer can't fly. No, they don't just fly on Christmas. Oh, I know. They were magical reindeer. They are magical reindeer. So I guess Santa's reindeer do fly. Something about the fairy dust, or I don't know what it is, but something makes them fly. But the standard, average, everyday reindeer cannot fly, but they are fast. The adults, when they're running from predators, they can run at speeds of about 50 to 60 miles per hour, but only for short distance. It's mostly that speed is for evading predators. A sustained pace is more 10 to 15 miles per hour. And that's what I said. During migration, 10 to 15, 20 miles an hour, that's the speeds they usually go. Now the calves, much smaller, not as long of legs, they can only run at about 30 miles per hour. But they can do that real shortly after birth. And it doesn't take them long to grow and reach those top speeds of 50 to 60. Because if you're really small and only going about 30 miles an hour, yeah, you better stick around your parents, because those predators can run faster and they can catch you. And who are their predators? Well, because of where they live, the wolves are one of the biggest. Yeah, up in the Arctic. So your timber wolves, your bears, and what a lot of people don't realize, golden eagles. Golden eagles, very large, strong, powerful birds. They're raptor, birds of prey. They can take out a weak or a young, small caribou. Now, the really young or weak reindeer, caribou, they are also preyed upon by lynx and wolverines, too. The lynx and the wolverines, they're too small a predator to go after an adult, strong, healthy reindeer. But they will go after the younger ones and the weaker ones. So how do they defend themselves? I mean, you've got these pretty big, strong predators after you. How do you defend yourselves? Well, one thing is, like I mentioned earlier, herding. They like to hang out in large groups. The larger the group, the more, scary it is to the predators. It's like, wow, that's a lot of animals. I'm going after one. I could be trampled on by another one. So they usually are watched very closely by these wolves or bears, and they wait to figure out where's the weak one, the weak link. But those are usually protected by the other ones. So this herding mentality, being social, that allows them to defend themselves from a lot of predators. The speed also helps. Like I said, 50 to 60 miles an hour for an adult. They can outrun a lot of predators with that speed, especially when you have a large herd all running together. It gets a little scary for that predator. Also, camouflage. Their colors help them blend into their surroundings. Remember I talked about the hollow fur helps them look more white? Where are they? They're in the snow. Helps them blend in. Now, they do have a keen sense of sight and hearing, which allows them to detect the predators very early. That way, they can initiate evasive measures very quickly before the predators get too close and have the chance to strike. Whether it's starting to pull the herd in closer together, create that big circle around the weak and the young, they can detect and start using these invasive measures early because of their keen sense of sight and hearing. So what is the conservation on these animals? Well, there are a few of the subspecies that are of concern. The numbers are dropping. Most of them are doing well, though. Most of the subspecies are doing quite well conservation-wise. Their numbers are pretty steady, but there are a few that are dropping and in danger of becoming endangered or at least threatened. What's causing this? Well, climate change has been one of the big factors. They're running out of space, their area to survive in. They're built for these cold climates. And with a warming climate, well, they need to adapt quickly. And that usually doesn't happen easily. So climate change has been very hard on the reindeer. Also, insect harassment, which comes along with climate change. Yeah, insects are more apt to harass these animals, bother them, get in their face and their eyes, and bite around their eyes, causing them to swell. And the insects with the warmer weather, there's more numerous. So insect harassment, food scarcity, easier predator access with melting snows, and altered migration routes. Maybe that river is too wide to cross and too deep now with the melting snow. They have to change their migration route, which may bring them into tougher territory to walk through, or maybe more predators in that territory. So yeah, all these things are what's causing the numbers to drop with certain subspecies. So I want to close up by talking a little bit more about Santa's reindeer since it is Christmas time now. And I'd already mentioned they're probably all females. A lot of the old stories say males. I mean, think of the names: Dasher, Dancer, Prancer, Vixen, Comet, Cupid, Donner, and Blitzen. They almost sound more like male names. Where did the flying come from? Can reindeer fly? Like I said, the average everyday reindeer, no. Now, most of these myths actually came from Norse mythology. Yeah, a lot of the myths about Santa and his reindeer came from the Norse mythology. The original names of Santa's reindeer actually came from a Clement Clark Morse's 1823 poem, A Visit from St. Nicholas, which most people know that poem as The Night Before Christmas. Yeah, the 8 reindeer: Dasher, Dancer, Prancer, Vixen, Comet, Cupid, Donner, and Blitzen. Now, Donner and Blitzen came from the German words for thunder, that's Donner, and lightning, Blitzen. Their names evoke speed, grace, and power, qualities perfect for pulling Santa's sleigh. So if you are awake on Christmas Eve late at night and you're watching your roof and you do see the reindeer flying through and landing on your roof, remember, only those 8, or if Rudolph's with them, 9, are the reindeer who can magically fly. Otherwise, you want to see reindeer, you're going to have to head up to the Arctic regions. Well, I hope you enjoyed listening to today's podcast and learning all about reindeer. Be certain to share the podcast with your nature-loving friends so that they can learn more about the natural world around them. If you'd like to support the podcast, visit the show notes for a link to my Ko-Fi page. A portion of all support will be used to plant trees. The rest helps to pay for keeping the podcast going. You can also support the podcast by purchasing awesome items at my online merch store. And if you like to journal your wanderings through nature, be certain to purchase a Nature Wanderer Nature Journal. All the links, once again, in the show notes. Well, I hope you enjoy the rest of your week. Stop back next week for another episode of the Nature Wanderer podcast. Have a great one, and keep exploring the nature around you. Did you know that plastic is made with oil, a fossil fuel that pollutes the environment? And did you know that only about 15% of all plastic is recycled into new products? Wouldn't it be awesome if we could live our lives without plastic so that we could stop harming the planet? Well, there's a company that wants to help you do just that. Life Without Plastic sells products that will reduce or eliminate your dependence on plastic. They have a large selection from toothbrushes to food storage containers to drinking straws, all plastic free. And it's reasonably priced. So what are you waiting for? Check out all these great plastic-free products and help save the planet. Just click on the link in the show notes to find out more and to start your journey to being plastic-free.